Night shift taxi drivers see a lot of strange things. Drunk passengers, late-night travelers, people running from problems. But every once in a while, someone gets into the back seat who brings something far darker with them. The following stories come from taxi drivers who experienced nights they will never forget. Encounters with strangers that turned into something far more terrifying than they ever expected. So if you're ready, let's begin. Good evening. My name is Daniel Ramirez, and what I'm about to tell you is something that happened to me several years ago when I worked as a taxi driver in Texas. Even today, I still can't explain it. It was around 8 o'clock at night. Just like every other evening, I started my shift and drove toward the Greyhound bus station. That was usually the place where I could find the most passengers. But that night, something strange happened before I could even get there. I was stopped at a red traffic light. The street was quiet. No pedestrians, no cars passing by. Just me, sitting in my taxi, waiting for the light to change. Then, suddenly, the passenger door opened. A woman got into my taxi. I swear to you, I had not seen her approach the car. She simply appeared out of nowhere. She looked to be about 60 years old. She was dressed completely in black. For a moment, I felt startled and, honestly, a little annoyed. But I didn't want to be rude, so I said politely, "Good evening. Next time, please signal before getting in. It could be dangerous. I didn't even see you. I could have run you over." But the woman ignored what I said. She simply looked forward and said in a calm voice, "Take me home. They are waiting for me, and I'm in a hurry." She handed me a small old piece of paper. Written on it was an address. So I started driving. After a few seconds, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The woman was staring directly at me, without blinking, without looking away, just staring. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying for hours. Something about her gaze made me uncomfortable. So I asked her, "Ma'am, are you feeling all right?" She answered quietly, "I need to get home quickly. My husband and my son are waiting for me." So I pressed the gas pedal a little harder. I wanted to get her there as soon as possible. About 10 minutes later, we arrived at the address she had given me. But when I looked around, something felt wrong. The area was completely empty. There was only one house there, and it looked abandoned. The windows were broken. The walls were dark and damaged. Weeds were growing everywhere. I turned slightly and said, "Ma'am, I think we might have the wrong place. Could you tell me exactly where I should go?" She answered immediately, "This is the place. Thank you." Then she opened the door, stepped out of the taxi, and walked toward the abandoned house. I sat there for a moment, confused. Why would anyone enter a place like that? The area looked dangerous. So I decided to wait for a few minutes. Maybe she would come back outside. But she didn't. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. Still nothing. Finally, I got out of my taxi. I walked closer to the house and called out, "Ma'am, are you okay?" No answer. The house was only 1 story tall, so I stepped closer and looked inside.
I used the flashlight on my phone. The place was empty, completely empty. There was no furniture, no signs that anyone had been there, and most importantly, no woman. She had completely disappeared. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly ran back to my taxi and drove away. I was confused and honestly, a little scared. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about that address, so I searched it on the internet, and what I found made my blood run cold. 10 years earlier, a gas leak caused a terrible fire in that exact house. The house burned down completely. Inside were a man and his 8-year-old son. Both of them died in the fire. As I kept reading the article, I saw a photograph, and the moment I saw it, I froze. It was her, the same woman who had gotten into my taxi. The article said she was the mother and wife of the victims. That night, she was out of town for work, but when she received the news, she suffered a heart attack and died before she could return home. At that moment, everything made sense. That poor woman was still trying to return home to her family. I never imagined something like that could happen to me. An encounter with someone who had already passed away. But it did. And even now, I still don't understand why it happened to me.
Before I start this story, there's something you need to understand. For years, I worked as a taxi driver in Phoenix, Arizona. And during that time, I picked up thousands of passengers. Drunk people, businessmen, tourists, late-night travelers. But one night, I picked up someone who wasn't supposed to be there. And the strange part is, I wasn't the only one who saw it. But by the time I realized what had happened, it was already too late. My name is Frank Russo, and this is one of the many strange experiences I've had during the years I worked as a taxi driver. But out of all of them, this one was the most disturbing. I've been driving taxis for 20 years now, but this happened when I had just started. Back then, I was working night shifts in Phoenix, Arizona. One evening, I had just dropped a passenger off at the airport. As I was preparing to leave, another fare approached my car. It was a well-dressed man who had just arrived in the city and needed a ride to his hotel. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a woman. The woman looked extremely pale, almost sickly. She was wearing a long, elegant black dress. The man, on the other hand, was dressed in a sharp business suit, carrying a briefcase. He looked like a typical businessman traveling for work. First, the woman got into the back seat of my taxi. While she did that, the man placed his suitcase in the trunk. Then he got inside the car and immediately started talking on his cell phone. From what I could hear, he was discussing business matters with someone. Numbers, meetings, contracts, typical work talk. The woman didn't say a word. She didn't move. She didn't even look up. In fact, I could barely see her face because she kept her head lowered the entire time. A few minutes later, the man finished his phone call. Then he asked me, "How much longer until we reach the hotel?" He explained that he had a business dinner at 8 o'clock and needed to arrive on time. I glanced at the navigator and told him, "We're already close." Then I quickly looked at my phone to check the time and said, "Don't worry, you and your wife will still have time to get ready." There was a short silence. Then the man said something that immediately confused me. "My wife? I'm traveling alone. I'm divorced." For a moment, I thought he was joking, so I looked up at the rearview mirror, and that's when my stomach dropped. The back seat was empty. There was no woman, no black dress, no passenger, just the man sitting there alone. The woman who had gotten into my taxi only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. The shock was so intense that I nearly crashed the car. The man immediately told me, "Hey, watch the road." He sounded annoyed. I quickly apologized and said I didn't know what had happened. Of course, I didn't mention the woman. I couldn't. I was still trying to understand what I had just seen. Somehow we reached the hotel. The man paid the fare, stepped out of the taxi, grabbed his suitcase, and walked inside. After that, I decided to stop working for the night. I was too confused and nervous to continue driving, so I went straight home. The next morning, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, a detective from the district attorney's office was standing outside. He told me he needed to ask me some questions about a passenger I had dropped off at the hotel the night before. Apparently, they had tracked my taxi using the hotel's security cameras. My license plate was clearly visible. The detective asked me if I had driven a man named Mr. Brooks to that hotel. He showed me a photo. It was the same man. I said yes. Then I asked what happened. The detective looked at me for a moment before answering. Mr. Brooks was found dead in his room this morning. Someone had entered the room while avoiding the security cameras and killed him. The detective asked me if I had noticed anything unusual, anything suspicious about the passenger. I told him about the small conversation we had regarding the dinner he planned to attend, but I left something out. I never mentioned the woman, because honestly, who would believe that? After that, the detective left, and I didn't hear anything else about the case, until a few weeks later. One night I was scrolling online when I saw something familiar. The hotel's security footage had gone viral. The video clearly showed my taxi pulling up to the hotel. Then the man stepped out of the car, exactly as I remembered. But what terrified everyone watching the video was what happened next. Right behind him, a dark shadow stepped out of the taxi too. A shape, a silhouette, something that looked like a person, but no one else had been in the car, except for her. I knew immediately what it was, or rather, who it was. The woman in the black dress, the one who had disappeared from my back seat, or whatever she really was. Because at this point, I knew she wasn't human. Some people online said the shadow was death itself, following him, waiting for the right moment. But the truth is, that's something we'll probably never know. All I can say is this. Even today, when I tell this story, the hair on my arms still stands on end.
Before I tell you this story, I want to make something clear. This isn't about ghosts. There's no paranormal mystery here. No spirits. No shadows. No supernatural explanation. And honestly, I wish there was. Because what happened that night was far worse than any ghost story.
My name is Elias Crow, and I've been working as a taxi driver in California for several years. When you drive at night long enough, you meet all kinds of people. Tourists, partygoers, late-night workers, sometimes strange people. But once in a while, you meet someone who makes you realize how dangerous the real world can be. One night, I had just dropped off a woman at her house. As I turned the corner onto the next street, I noticed an empty lot. I pulled over for a moment so I could answer a phone call. It was quiet, almost no traffic, the kind of calm that usually happens late at night. I had just finished the call and was about to drive away when suddenly a man walked out of the empty lot. He was carrying a large, worn-out suitcase. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual about him. He was well-dressed, clean, presentable, not someone who looked homeless or suspicious. He approached my taxi and asked, "Are you in service? I need a ride home." I hesitated. Something about the situation didn't sit right with me. Why had he come out of that empty lot? And why was he carrying such a heavy suitcase? The man must have noticed my hesitation. He laughed a little and said in a friendly tone, "Don't worry, I just stepped into the lot to relieve myself. That's why I came from there." The strange thing was, I hadn't asked him anything, but for some reason he felt the need to explain himself. After a moment, I shrugged and said, "All right, get in." The man opened the trunk and placed the suitcase inside. Then he got into the back seat and gave me an address, so I started driving. Almost immediately, I noticed something strange about him. He seemed nervous. He kept moving his legs, looking around, glancing out the windows, almost like he was afraid someone might be watching. Trying to make conversation, I asked, "Coming back from a trip?" He didn't answer right away. Then he finally said, "No, I'm moving." After that, he clearly didn't want to talk anymore, so I stopped trying and just focused on the road. We were driving down a large avenue. Usually the street is packed with traffic, but since it was already late, there were only a few cars passing by. And then I heard something. A bang. Then another. And then something that made my blood run cold. Screaming. The sound was coming from the trunk. There were loud banging noises, and someone was clearly crying for help. I looked at the man through the rearview mirror. His face had gone pale. "Stop the car," he said quickly. But we were still moving along the avenue. There wasn't anywhere safe to stop immediately. I looked at him again and asked, "What the hell is going on? What's inside that suitcase?" Suddenly, the man opened the door and jumped out of the moving taxi. Luckily, we weren't driving very fast. He rolled on the pavement, got up, and immediately started running in the opposite direction. Several cars almost hit him, but he managed to escape across the street and disappear into the darkness. I immediately pulled the car over. My heart was racing. I ran to the back of the taxi and opened the trunk. The suitcase was now half open, but the screaming had stopped. Slowly, I opened it the rest of the way. Inside was a young woman. She was badly injured, covered in bruises, and completely unconscious. I immediately called the police and an ambulance. They arrived within minutes and rushed the girl to the hospital. I gave my statement to the police. Then I went home. But that night, I couldn't sleep at all. A few days later, I saw the story on the news. The girl had survived. She told the police that the man was her ex-boyfriend. He tricked her into meeting him. Then he took her to that empty lot and tried to kill her. But he made one terrible mistake. He didn't realize she was still alive when he placed her inside the suitcase. The man went on the run, but a few days later, police found him hiding in New Mexico. Now he's sitting behind bars. Like I said before, this story isn't paranormal. But to me, the fact that things like this happen in the real world every single day is far more terrifying than any ghost story.